Chapter 55. The Ministry of Virtue. But if I take this pleasure with so much prudence and circumspection, I shall no longer find it a pleasure. By Lope de Vega. As soon as our hero had returned to Paris and had come out of the study of the Marquis de la Mole, who seemed very displeased with the dispatches that were given him, he rushed off for the Comte Altamira. This noble foreigner combined with the advantage of having once been condemned to death of very grave demeanor together with the good fortune of a devout temperament. These two qualities, and more than anything, the Comte's high birth, made an especial appeal to Madame de Fervaques, who saw a lot of him. Julien solemnly confessed to him that he was very much in love with her. Her virtue is the purest and the highest, answered Altamira, only it is a little Jesuitical and dogmatic. There are days when, though I understand each of the expressions which she makes use of, I never understand the whole sentence. She often makes me think that I do not know French as well as I am said to. But your acquaintance with her will get you talked about. It will give you weight in the world. But let us go to Bustos, said Count Altamira, who had a methodical turn of mind. He once paid court to Madame la Marquise. Don Diego Bustos had the matter explained to him at length, while he said nothing, like a barrister in his chambers. He had a big monk-like face with black mustaches and an inimitable gravity. He was, however, a good carbonaro. I understand, he said to Julien at last. Has the Marquise de Fervaques had lovers, or has she not? Have you consequently any hope of success? That is the question. I don't mind telling you, for my own part, that I have failed. Now that I am no more piqued, I reason it out to myself in this way. She is often bad-tempered, and as I will tell you in a minute, she is quite vindictive. I fail to detect in her that bilious temperament which is the sign of genius, and shows as it were a veneer of passion over all its actions. On the contrary, she owes her rare beauty and her fresh complexion to the phlegmatic, tranquil character of the Dutch. Julien began to lose patience with the phlegmatic slowness of the imperturbable Spaniard. He could not help giving vent to some monosyllables from time to time. Will you listen to me? Don Diego Bustos gravely said to him, Forgive the furia franchise. I am all ears, said Julien. The Marquise de Fervaques, then, is a great hater. She persecutes ruthlessly people she has never seen, advocates, poor devils of men of letters who have composed songs like Call, you know, J. La Merit and Marot, etc. And Julien had to put up with the whole quotation. The Spaniard was very pleased to get a chance of singing in French. That divine song was never listened to more impatiently. When it was finished, Don Diego said, The Marquise procured the dismissal of the author of the song. Un jour l'amour au cabaret. Julien shuddered lest he should want to sing it. He contented himself with analyzing it. As a matter of fact, it was blasphemous and somewhat indecent. When the Marquise became enraged against that song, said Don Diego, I remarked to her that a woman of her rank ought not to read all the stupid things that are published. Whatever progress piety and gravity may make, France will always have a cabaret literature. Be careful, I said to Madame de Fervaques when she had succeeded in depriving the author, a poor devil on half-pay, of a place worth 1,800 francs a year. You have attacked this rimster with your own arms. He may answer you with his rhymes. He will make a song about virtue. The gilded salons will be on your side, but people who like to laugh will repeat his epigrams. Do you know, monsieur, what the Marquise answered? Let all Paris come and see me walking to my martyrdom for the sake of the Lord. It will be a new spectacle for France. The people will learn to respect the quality. It will be the finest day of my life. Her eyes never looked finer. And she has superb ones, exclaimed Julien. I see that you are in love. Further, went on Don Diego Bustos gravely, she has not the bilious constitution which causes vindictiveness. If, however, she likes to do harm, it is because she is unhappy. I suspect some secret misfortune. May it not be quite well a case of prude tired of her role? The Spaniard looked at him in silence for a good minute. That's the whole point, he added gravely, and that's what may give you ground for some hope. I have often reflected about it during the 2 years that I was her very humble servant. All your future, my amorous sir, depends on this great problem. Is she a prude tired of her role, and only malicious because she is unhappy? Or, said Altamira, emerging at last from his deep silence, can it be, as I have said 20 times before, simply a case of French vanity. The memory of her father, the celebrated cloth merchant, constitutes the unhappiness of this frigid, melancholy nature. The only happiness she could find would be to live in Toledo and to be tortured by a confessor who would show her hell wide open every day. "Altamira informs me you are one of us," said Don Diego, whose demeanor was growing graver and graver to Julien as he went out. "You will help us one day in re-winning our liberty, so I would like to help you in this little amusement. It is right that you should know the Mercale's style. Here are 4 letters in her handwriting." "I will copy them out," exclaimed Julien, "and bring them back to you. And you will never let anyone know a word of what we have been saying." "Never, on my honor," cried Julien. "Well, God help you," added the Spaniard, and he silently escorted Altamira and Julien as far as the staircase. This somewhat amused our hero. He was on the point of smiling. "So we have the devout Altamira," he said to himself, "aiding me in an adulterous enterprise." During Don Diego's solemn conversation, Julien had been attentive to the hour struck by the clock of the Hotel d'Aliger. The dinner hour was drawing near. He was going to see Mathilde again. He went in and dressed with much care. "Mistake number 1, he said to himself as he descended the staircase. "I must follow the prince's instructions to the letter." He went up to his room again and put on a traveling suit which was as simple as it could be. "All I have to do now," he thought, "is to keep control of my expression." It was only 5:30, and they dined at 6. He thought of going down to the salon, which he found deserted. He was moved to the point of tears at the sight of the blue sofa. "I must make an end of this foolish sensitiveness," he said angrily. "It will betray me." He took up a paper in order to keep himself in countenance, and passed 3 or 4 times from the salon into the garden. It was only when he was well concealed by a large oak and was trembling all over that he ventured to raise his eyes at Mademoiselle de la Mole's window. It was hermetically sealed. He was on the point of fainting and remained for a long time leaning against the oak. Then, with a staggering step, he went to have another look at the gardener's ladder, the chain which he had once forced asunder, in, alas, such different circumstances, had not yet been repaired. Carried away by a moment of madness, Julien pressed it to his lips. After having wandered about for a long time between the salon and the garden, Julien felt horribly tired. He was now feeling acutely the effects of a first success. "My eyes will be expressionless, and will not betray me." The guests gradually arrived in the salon. The door never opened without instilling anxiety into Julien's heart. They sat down at table. Mademoiselle de la Mole, always faithful to her habit of keeping people waiting, eventually appeared. She blushed a great deal on seeing Julien. She had not been told of his arrival. In accordance with Prince Korasoff's recommendation, Julien looked at his hands. They were trembling. Troubled though he was beyond words by this discovery, he was sufficiently happy to look merely tired. De la Mole sans esprit. The Marquise spoke to him a minute afterwards and complimented him on his tired appearance. Julien said to himself at every minute, "I ought not to look too much at Mademoiselle de la Mole. I ought not to avoid looking at her too much either. I must appear as I was 8 days before my unhappiness." He had occasion to be satisfied with his success and remained in the salon. Paying attention for the first time to the mistress of the house, he made every effort to make the visitors speak and to keep the conversation alive. His politeness was rewarded. Madame la Marquise de Fervaques was announced about 8 o'clock. Julien retired, and shortly afterwards appeared dressed with the greatest care. Madame de la Mole was infinitely grateful to him for this mark of respect, and made a point of manifesting her satisfaction by telling Madame de Fervaques about his journey. Julien established himself near the Marquise in such a position that Mathilde could not notice his eyes. In this position he lavished, in accordance with all the rules in the art of love, the most abject admiration on Madame de Fervaques. The first of the 53 letters with which Prince Korasoff had presented him commenced with a tirade on this sentiment. The Marquise announced that she was going to the Opera Bouffe. Julien rushed there. He ran across the Chevalier de Beauvoisis, who took him into a box occupied by Messrs. The Gentlemen of the Chamber, just next to Madame de Fervaques's box. Julien constantly looked at her. "I must keep a siege journal," he said to himself as he went back to the hotel. Otherwise I shall forget my attacks. He wrote 2 or 3 pages on this boring theme, and in this way achieved the admirable result of scarcely thinking at all about Mademoiselle de la Mole. Mathilde had almost forgotten him during his journey. He is simply a commonplace person after all, she thought. His name will always recall to me the greatest mistake in my life. I must honestly go back to all my ideas about prudence and honor. A woman who forgets them has everything to lose. She showed herself inclined to allow the contract with the Marquis de Croisenois, which had been prepared so long ago, to be at last concluded. He was mad with joy. He would have been very much astonished had he been told that there was an element of resignation at the bottom of those feelings of Mathilde which made him so proud. All Mademoiselle de la Mole's ideas changed when she saw Julien. As a matter of fact, he is my husband, she said to herself. If I am sincere in my return to sensible notions, he is clearly the man I ought to marry. She was expecting importunities and airs of unhappiness on the part of Julien. She commenced rehearsing her answers, for he would doubtless try to address some words to her when they left the dinner table. Far from that, he remained stubbornly in the salon, and did not even look in the direction of the garden, though God knows what pain that caused him. It is better to have this explanation out all at once, thought Mademoiselle de la Mole. She went into the garden alone. Julien did not appear. Mathilde went and walked near the salon window. She found him very much occupied in describing to Madame de Fervaques the old ruined chateau which crown the banks along the Rhine and invest them with so much atmosphere. He was beginning to acquit himself with some credit in that sentimental picturesque jargon which is called wit in certain salons. Prince Korasoff would have been very proud if he had been at Paris. This evening was exactly what he had predicted. He would have approved the line of conduct which Julien followed on the subsequent days. An intrigue among the members of the secret government was going to bestow a few blue ribbons. Madame Marechal de Fervaques was insisting on her great-uncle being made a chevalier of the order. The Marquis de la Mole had the same pretensions for his father-in-law. They joined forces, and the Marechal came to the Hôtel de la Mole nearly every day. It was from her that Julien learned that the Marquis was going to be a minister. He was offering to the Camarilla a very ingenious plan for the annihilation of the charter within 3 years without any disturbance. If M. de la Mole became a minister, Julien could hope for a bishopric, but all these important interests seemed to be veiled and hazy. His imagination only perceived them very vaguely, and so to speak, in the far distance. The awful unhappiness which was making him into a madman could find no other interest in life except the character of his relations with Mademoiselle de la Mole. He calculated that after 5 or 6 careful years he would manage to get himself loved again. This cold brain had been reduced, as one sees, to a state of complete disorder. Out of all the qualities which had formerly distinguished him, all that remained was a little firmness. He was literally faithful to the line of conduct which Prince Korasoff had dictated, and placed himself every evening near Madame Fervaques' armchair, but he found it impossible to think of a word to say to her. The strain of making Mathilde think that he had recovered exhausted his whole moral force, and when he was with the Marechal he seemed almost lifeless. Even his eyes had lost all their fire. As in cases of extreme physical suffering, Madame de la Mole's views were invariably a counterpart of the opinions of that husband of hers who could make her into a duchess. She had been singing Julien's praises for some days.